Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of Fake Accents Unite. I am joined, as always, by my incorrigible host, the Britisher. Good evening, sir.
Yes, good evening. How are we doing?
We're all right. A little bit, a little bit rushed, but that's my own fault for being incensed, as it were, by some of the news, which we'll go through later on. But how's your week?
Nonsense, that's your excuse. In reality, it was just that the ladies' netball team just didn't want to let you go.
Well, of course, you know. In fact, I've got several of them hanging off me at the moment. It's a real battle to even approach the monitors, the computer.
I can well imagine. You know, I mean, from what you tell me privately, you're constantly trying to beat them off with a stick.
They're remarkably quiet, you know, for given that I obviously have, you know, all 11 of them in here at once, you know, and the substitutes, obviously,
And the subs, yes, I was just about to say. What about the subs bench? Yes.
In reserve. Lovely to see so many of the regulars in chat as well. I can see Meh, I can see Rubber, I can see Byron Brand, Stepwise, and Bernsey and Craig Jovanovic and others. So good to see you all this evening. How has your week been, Britisher? What have you been up to?
Well, I mean, it's sort of miserable weather, and it's just sort of misery throughout, and then it's sort of interspersed with the hyperactivity of trying to get the week that was out, and then soon enough, time comes around again, and I have to remember, I need to be online, because Fake Accents Unite is about to start.
Which it is, and was, and continues to be.
And, yep.
What was I? Yeah. We have, of course, had Bonfire night this evening. This week. It is that famous of British traditions, Bonfire night, Guy Fawkes night, as some of you may know it.
Or as it's known as the night in which we taught Guy Fawkes to sign his name properly.
Oh, for those who don't know, Guy Fawkes was tortured on the rack, and there is a quite famous picture of his signature before and after such treatment, and one is barely recognisable, shall we say, from the other. So you're being a bit of an edgy boy this evening, Britisher. A bit of an edgy boy. Goodness me. Not that I'm saying that his what shall we say, execution was unjust, but a little bit barbaric by today's standards, certainly, to have the rack involved, I must say.
Well, I think the rack involved was not really due to his having done what he had done. I think it was more a matter of trying to find out who else had been involved.
Well, there were a number of conspirators, weren't there? I'm trying desperately to remember what the name of the chap was who did mastermind it. It's something a lot less evocative than Guy Fawkes, Guido Fawkes, as you might say. But is in a name like Roger Corduroy or something like that. I don't know. But
Roger Corduroy. Yes, yeah, that sounds like a villain.
It sounds about right.
I can see that being the next Bond villain. Roger Corduroy.
Roger Corduroy. Let me see. The 5th of...
You know, whenever he turns up, you get the sort of, dramatic music, dun dun dun, and there he is in his corduroy dungarees.
The gunpowder.
Finally we meet, Mr. Bond.
And a cat is there, of course. Robert Catesby, that's the guy. He was the mastermind of the gunpowder plot. So there you go. And it was him, Guy Fawkes, and a chap called Thomas Percy, who were who were the key conspirators, as it were. And of course, conspirators and the etymology therein is quite relevant, given that they were Spanish sympathisers, and then basically concocted the idea of taking over the Parliament when they realised that. Or blowing up Parliament when they realised the Spanish wouldn't help them. So, yes, I was quite surprised actually, because I found myself watching, of all things, Women's Hour on the Academic Agents channel. Are you aware that he does this now, Women's Hour?
No, I am not aware that he has a Women's Hour.
So Women's Hour, he's not involved at all. He literally sets up the stream and leaves before it even goes live, and gives them an hour, and they can use that time to talk about whatever they want. And there's several women who go on there, usually 2 to 4. Poe, the person, is usually hosting it, for instance. But I was surprised to find out that neither of them, being that particular stream was 2 women, Poe and a lass called Birdie, and neither of them knew anything about the history of Bonfire Night. But also there didn't seem to be any kind of really clear, I suppose, commonality of traditional sort of behaviour, like what kind of rites and ceremonies and so on go on for Bonfire Night and Guy Fawkes Night. So I'm just wondering, given that you live in the north of the country and I live in the south of the country.
Well, so rumour says.
Oh, for goodness sake, Bridget. Like, I'm not narrowing it down to the county, the town, and the village. Now it's all... But, yes, we're... And who knows? Maybe I'm lying to throw them off. But we definitely live in different parts of the UK, and I'm just curious, especially given your continental background, what, if anything, do you do, or does the area you're in do to celebrate Bonfire Night?
Fireworks, bonfire, yeah.
That's the
no great marches, no burning crosses, no costumes.
Oh.
Isn't it Lewis? They have a march when they carry burning crosses, and I think it refers to some martyrs of theirs or whatever.
But burning crosses it varies from year to year. But in the southeast and to some extent the southwest, as I understand it, as I've been told, I thought this was nationwide. I assumed that this was something which happened all over the UK, but apparently not. And that is that we have a procession. There are bonfire societies who only exist for once a year to get together and put on a show, essentially. They dress up in colourful outfits, period costume, and indeed, experimental stuff. And they get together with usually the drum corps from whatever area that they're frequenting. So instead of one singular bonfire night, there's usually a week of bonfire nights that go on in certainly the southeast, and all of the towns basically get the procession one night of the week, and at least the big towns do, and an enormous procession of drums comes down the road, and it's pitch black because it's obviously that time of year, and you can just hear them thudding, and they're carrying their torches. It's not burning crosses, but it is a number of effigies, a number of signs, and certainly burning torches, and various people. It's a real mix, actually, because it's not the original gunpowder treason being very Protestant versus Catholic, right? Guido Fawkes was a Catholic, and so were his conspirators, and the point of it was to blow up the Protestant government and install a Catholic, preferably Spanish-styled Catholic government, and take over the UK. So that has kind of gone by the by, and now a lot of peasantry were celebrating Treason Day, Gunpowder Treason Day, and it was originally, of course, to celebrate the survival of the king. And over time, they were allowed, initially just to have a bonfire as long as it wasn't threatening anyone, and then it progressed as time went on to fireworks and what we know it as today. But this procession of religious and pagan and just generally folky type people who go through the town. And then obviously you've got the modern element as well. Usually people trying to sell sticks that spin with lights on and stuff like that. Bits of tat that would never get used again. And of course, people eating hot dogs and drinking soup seems to be the standard. So, at least where I come from, anyway. And it's a big event. It's a big event to me, and one of those things which is really quite quintessentially British in all of its eccentric kind of glory. And I thought it was a real shame to discover that actually this seems to be something exclusive, I suppose, to Southeast, or certainly South.
I don't think it's exclusive. I think just various regions do it different ways.
But we literally burn an effigy
Is it tied to Bonfire Night or not? Aren't there these? I think somewhere in Scotland there is a place where they process through the town, and they're sort of waving baskets of burning something, baskets of fire of some sort that they sort of wave on a chain around themselves and stuff like that. I'm not sure if that's connected to Bonfire Night. I believe it definitely happens somewhere around the same time, so it could be. So there are all sorts of local, traditions involved, but I think the one unifying aspect is always, there's a bonfire and there's fireworks.
There's a bonfire fire. I suppose that I shouldn't be disheartened then. I should.
I mean, isn't there somewhere a place? I don't know which one this is. Again, it's one of the more famous Guy Fawkes nights, in which they have giant effigies which they burn on the bonfire.
Well, I mean, yeah, we
burn
the guy.
They process those effigies through town first. So I think famously, some years back, there was a giant sort of papier-mâché Osama bin Laden.
I think
so. It tends to be a sort of caricature of a hate figure.
There's definitely something. I know Lewis does do something similar, but I don't.
Is it Lewis I'm thinking about? I don't know.
Lewis takes it all very seriously. So
they dial it all to 11. Yes,
they're very proud of always putting on the most spectacular bonfire night in the country. And they do march the procession, but this is seen as relatively bad taste usually. I mean, it's very left-leaning in terms of the hate figures. I can't remember, because it's not just the main one is usually politically correct, and then there's other little ones that they allow to be burned. I think they burned Nigel Farage one year, and that sort of thing. So usually, I mean, the ones that I attend and have attended are usually it's just an enormous effigy of Guy Fawkes himself. And it's usually the culmination of the fireworks display is that gets detonated. And, he doesn't usually go on the bonfire, or if it is on the bonfire, then he gets blown up on top of it. But we seem to have got it into our head,
Subtle.
Certainly around where I lived, we quite like blowing him up, and as you don't want to get
so they blow up the whole thing. They don't just blow his hand off, So
no.
His signature may be a bit scrawny afterwards.
I've still got, in a box somewhere, shards of bits of Guy that blew into the crowd one year when the wind was going the wrong way. Yeah, So there we go. Lewis will burn the effigies of whichever people on the right offend them. Is Merkel on the right? I don't think they burned an effigy of Merkel. But, sorry, I'm reading the chat, and of course they're taking us off in different directions. But yes, I just thought I'd share the fact that Bonfire Night is one of those traditions which is very, close to my heart as something I look forward to every year. And I appreciate that it's not something that everyone does, but yeah, I thought that was good story to kind of enter with. If anyone in the chat has their own sort of bonfire night stories, I'd love to hear them as well. And of course, for me, it's always been this entry, I suppose, into Remembrance. It's like that's the surreal relationship, between All Hallows Eve and Halloween, right? Are you aware of the kind of the cultural, the mythological basis for Halloween?
I know there is some sort of mythological basis in sort of the Celtic world, so to speak, I believe, that has led to it, but I couldn't point to anything specific.
Sure. So in the Christian tradition, I suppose, although it's got roots back to Samhain and kind of earlier, but it was taken on All Hallows Eve, which is the day before Halloween, is the day which Halloween is All Hallows Eve. So you have Halloween, and then the first of November, which is All Hallows Day. So on All Hallows Eve, the reason for all the, excluding the Americanization and the dress up and whatnot, that's the last day on Earth that the demons get to come out and play. That's the last day. The reason they're so active on that particular day is because on All Hallows Day, the following day, the angels come down and basically carve them up and throw them down into the pit to be burned. So there was used to be this kind of celebration. But what I'm getting at is that there's this dichotomy between the 2 days, where one day is for sort of evil, one day is for good, and then you've also got you've got Bonfire Night, which is this sort of supposed to be originally the celebration of the survival of the king, which is now sort of more of a cultural thing, which some people don't know really why they do it, but remember the 5th of November, everybody knows the rhyme, and that leads, if you know the history of that, then that's quite a solemn occasion in the sense that, or it's a celebratory occasion because the king survived, and it's also a solemn occasion because this is a reminder of what happens to you if you try and overthrow the king in such a way as well. And then you have Remembrance Day, which comes very shortly afterwards. It's 3 days away now, and aside from Christmas and in Easter, it is in my top 3. It's Christmas, Easter, and Remembrance Day. Remembrance Day being a very possibly one of the most important dates in my particular calendar, as you may guess. But
with Remembrance Day, the one thing that kind of marks it out is that precisely what you were alluding to before. With most days, the actual origins very much become vague. It kind of becomes opaque over time. With Remembrance Day, that is the one day that seems to actually still be quite clearly sort of embedded as to this is why we do it.
You say that, although it is unclear. I mean, so few people understand or know anything about World War One. We have this foundational myth in World War Two, which is really like this strong connection. The people we sacrifice to save Europe is usually the way it's presented. But of course, it's to remember all wars, past and present, and the two big ones are World War One and World War Two, and then recent conflicts are usually brought up in the speeches. So, I mean, I find that it's different, but I think that the overarching sentiment, and the reason as well that it has lasted longer than a lot of other things, is because that sentiment is something which is usually always present. There is not a generation that goes by without some form of conflict, even if it's not been on home soil, right?
It kind of kept it's kept alive to a large extent by that, because the next generation will then lose people, which again it then wishes to remember.
It's one of those few events I feel the public retains respect for, and to the extent where I remember a ceremony a few years back. I went back to my hometown and we gathered, and first off I was surprised how few people actually gather at the memorial, but the people who do gather are sort of, understand why they're there. But there's perhaps 400 or 500 people, but it's a town with about 20,000 in. And I know a lot of people also go down to the coastal towns to go to the bigger ceremonies, though, so that's less of an issue. But I remember some kids who went through on scooters, making a lot of noise during the 2-minute silence, and the atmosphere was thick. You could feel that the crowd, especially the men in the crowd, were seething with rage.
Yes, but then of course when it comes to kids, you know the best way of getting them to make noise is to tell them not to.
Well, no, these are kids who come up during the silence, but it's also it's different to a baby crying. We're talking about sort of youths between sort of 10 and 14 who come up, who should know better, and they don't, and it's something which you could feel that there was both this anger, but also this idea that you wouldn't dare disrespect the silence by breaking your own in order to correct. Does that make sense? So you wouldn't hush.
I'm just wondering, what future would be not so obvious as nightmare here. Perhaps the chat can help me out. You know how Christmas is really just one big knees up these days. The same thing with Easter. It's chocolate eggs and whatever. Guy Fawkes Night is bonfires and fireworks and not that many kids necessarily know it tied to Guy Fawkes and an attempted coup and whatever. But I'm just sort of trying to think, just use your darkest humour possible. What would be sort of the development in future? So when you've got Not So Obvious as a sort of white-haired octogenarian swearing at the world that everything's gone wrong, how does Remembrance Day look like? I would assume more than likely Mars makes packets, a bit like with an Easter egg, but they'll do a remembrance packet of chocolate soldiers you can eat. Coca-Cola will more than likely do poppy flavored Remembrance edition. I'm just keen to know what people's bad taste takes would be of the sort of Nightmare on Elm Street for Remembrance Day, just for Not So Obvious.
I'm thinking probably. I mean, chat says November the 11th, Paintball Day, a colour run or something like that. Nice artful lodger there. Opium flavoured Coca-Cola. Yeah, the very idea of commercializing Remembrance Day feels a bit sickening to me. I can't lie, but I can't decide what's worse: like a fully commercialized Remembrance Day where everybody sort of like there's stalls set up and everybody tries to sell something, and then it basically everyone is quiet for 2 minutes and then the market continues, or if the very day itself fading to obscurity to the point where only a handful of people still observe it. Although I don't think either of those are particularly likely. I think what's more likely to happen is, I suppose, the forgetting of the largest sacrifices in favour of not trivial necessarily, but conflicting. It's easy to muddy the message. For instance, that for the last 10 years or so, I know that there have been people who laid wreaths for what some might describe as frivolous causes at the foot of the Remembrance Memorial, and I can see this year is, like there'll be a Black Lives Matter wreath that goes down,
climate change wreath,
or a climate change wreath, or a pandemic wreath, and I'm like, it's like, irrespective of how you feel about any of those causes, this is not what Remembrance is about. Remembrance is about war and conflict and the conscious sacrifice that people made in order to defend a national ideal, which I don't think exists anymore. These people fought for home and country. That was it. Like there was nothing extra in there. There was no subtle other hidden motive. They signed up in their droves to protect their country and their friends, and to go and give the Jerrys a good one in World War II, and before then to prevent them from getting across Europe again. And it's and then in more recent conflicts, it's to protect the sovereign territory of the British Isles, and that is something which I do not want to see muddied. If I'm perfectly honest, I just that would be the nightmare.
The origins of it are very much kind of, and no doubt, all right wingers will cringe at my saying this, because it is usually used in other, in other context. But these were kind of the people's wars, where kind of, as opposed to there being a professional army one sends somewhere, in just the same way that we, during imperial times, had the sort of expeditionary force we could deploy, wherever it was needed. When it comes to the First World War and the Second World War, it was such a colossal thing that it was pretty much the population at war.
It is, but it's also, I think, I'm trying to remember the exact figure. I think the Great War killed something like, and it's in one of my speeches, but don't quote me on this. I think, I'm going to have to look it up now, because I can't force myself to give the figure without that. And it's not showing up. Okay. So the Great War had killed, more than 1 in 10 people in the country, and then the Spanish flu had come in, killed another 250,000 people, and then World War II had happened, and people still signed up. I suppose there was a sense of glory in it, as well as anything else. We were the British Empire, after all. It was, and it helped that we had learned so many lessons. This is the thing about Remembrance Day, because it's a celebration of both. It's a celebration of the lives that people lost to preserve what Britain was, but they failed. And this is the other thing which also holds it in such melancholy for me, is we won those wars, but we lost so much more than we gained. We gained our survival, but we lost like our status as a world power across both these conflicts and everything else. We lost an enormous quantity of particularly young men, but also sort of from other stripes as well. And those young men that we did lose were the quintessential British. The first people to die in conflict are the bravest. And as much as we love bringing up stories like Mad Jack Churchill, for instance, and his crazy bagpipes and the fact that he carried a sword into battle, an officer without his sword is improperly dressed, and the Germans didn't shoot him because they thought he was mad, and he single-handedly captured a battalion of German soldiers because he told them that he had Spitfires on standby, and they marched across no man's land and had them surrender. And or the people who said, we could have kept the war going if we had just, kept it going a few more years if we hadn't accepted their surrender. There's that kind of bally-ho attitude, I suppose. all came at the expense of, how many hundreds, how many thousands died who had a similar or similarly mad, one might say, attitude to the whole thing, but who just didn't get lucky. And so there's this real sense of melancholy about the day, and there's something in the British spirit as well. I think that resonates with it. It really speaks to me, and I think it's really important to remember what we were, not in a sense of like, we must get back to that, but in a sense of, well, this is what we were. This is what we lost.
You use that expression, the foundational myth. And I think to a certain extent, these two wars kind of do represent the foundational myth, but it's the foundational myth of modern Britain.
Yes.
So basically, this was what modern Britain rose out of.
Yes.
And in just the same way as the French today don't really identify with, Napoleon's France.
No.
You know what I mean? It is France, but it's the France of the past, and in that same way, it's British history, but it's British history of the past. It's in a way too great a distance removed from us, if you know what I mean. So,
well,
the further you go back, the harder it becomes in a way. Whereas anything that is post-war is still within close enough a reach. When you're thinking First World War and post-First World War, that's already fading into obscurity due to the fact that it's just so far back.
Well,
I think a lot of it has got to do with what is still within living memory.
Exactly, and I think this next 20 years or so, I suppose, is going to be... I mean, it's very interesting times that we live in now, but I think the next 20 years is going to be very telling in terms of what we can remember and what we choose to continue to remember as a society, because, the last people who remember the Second World War will pass away, or certainly fade to obscurity. And then one day there will be a news broadcast that the last person who who was born during the war has gone during the Second World War. Because I know that happened with the First World War about 10 years ago. 10, 15 years ago.
With the whole thing, I think it is a matter, when you sort of say in 20 years' time, what will we do in that regard? I think it's very much a question of, what sort of Britishness is still going to be celebrated in 20 years' time. And that will invariably influence as to what sort of festivals or what sort of events would be seen as, things people do then. I think we can agree there will be lots and lots of things that we don't celebrate anymore today, or we don't, various religious festivals or whatever that don't really have that much meaning to the nation anymore today, which perhaps 200-300 years ago would have been extremely important.
Well, we can see several festivals, or I suppose, or replacements sort of arising. I mean, aside from, you should know, you have a massive disdain. We have a day for everything now, right?
Yes.
International whatever day, right? National whatever day. And, many of them falling on the same date, ridiculously enough. And I wonder now, because obviously I'm thinking in terms of about 50 to 70 years ago, we've got this is one of the reasons as well for the great sort of equality sort of festival mindset, in a sense. Like, what do we celebrate? Well, we must celebrate equality, because all of the stuff to do with equality started coming in about 3 generations ago, and that's the way it's been. So I do wonder how it's going to progress, because I personally don't see a great deal that's worth celebrating in the same way. I don't think you can equate. I
think when it comes to equality, one of the crises we have today is the fact that people are trying to be Martin Luther King and they're trying to be suffragettes, but they don't really have a cause.
Yeah,
and one wishes to live the lifestyle. One wishes to be identified as some grand virtuous person who is struggling desperately for some sort of liberty or equality or whatever, but it's all already been achieved. And therefore it's a sort of, I think people like to call it LARPing.
But they're going. But the thing is that in the process of LARPing, they're going backwards. This is the other thing. Like, eventually there will need to be a reckoning, because otherwise there's no fucking country anymore. Some might argue that we're in that state now.
I think Rubber's in the chat or whatever. I mean, Rubber, like myself, we're of a similar vintage, and we can sort of sing songs of how things were in the 90s and how things are now. And it's ridiculous, just how things have been worsened. When it comes to race relations and things like that, it looked as if it was actually all sort of
fine,
going to come out all right. And instead, what has happened is some people have, started really kicking off and dividing everything and setting groups against one another. And all this is being done in the name of achieving equality. And you just look at it and you just go, this is absolute and complete insanity. But there we are. So, I mean, I always like to say it's sort of civil rights groups that once upon a time served a purpose. But the purpose of which had now been achieved, so now you can go, you can leave, you can disband, you can disappear. But that would mean giving up on the whole bandwagon. Not only giving up on the job and the political influence or whatever, but also giving up on the identity of, I am a freedom fighter for such and such, I mean, in that regard, I think what we've got to look forward to definitely is, even if the various COPs, if COP 26 or COP 27 or COP 28.5, whatever, if it were ever to decide, global warming, everything is correct as it's being stated, we have to completely give in, we have to send everybody back to live in forests and live as roof thatchers or whatever, there would still be environmental protesters. There would still be Insulate Britain. There would still be Extinction Rebellion, because it's just too good a thing to give up.
Well, they'd also know that they were working. I do wonder how many of these people would stick around if I started putting them against the wall. Sort of, if you put these people under actual pressure and not just, we're going to peel you off the road and send you home, thank you very much. If they were actually...
I don't think one needs to go, full Pinochet or anything. I think what could be... I think the one example that I would put forward is Extinction Rebellion. I think it was just before COVID or whatever. They had a big do in London, and they called it short. So they were causing all sorts of mayhem in London. They were, closing down bridges and creating hazards in junctions. Wasn't it when they left a yacht in the middle of Oxford Circus or something like that? And then what happened was that they continued, gluing themselves to buses, one of them, I think, glued themselves to the Gatwick Express. I mean, you can imagine how many people trying to catch a plane must have been delighted at that idea.
To be honest, throw them in front of the train, Britisher.
In the rush hour, when everybody wanted to get home, two chaps got on a tube train, and this is one of the really busy tube stations in London. So if you stop this one train, you stop everything coming in behind. You cause complete mayhem on the tube system. And I remember, the crowd wasn't pleased at the idea that they were not going to get home. And suddenly this burly chap just pointed at one of them and says, "You, down now." And the next thing you see is he starts sort of scaling the wagon, manages to get hold of the ankle of one of them and just pulls. Now, those platforms are concrete, so you can imagine he must have had a really great landing.
Chad.
I've no idea what happened to the second guy. And then after that, Extinction Rebellion decided to call off the rest of their... And then they had enough time over COVID and whatever to really wind themselves back up again for another bout, if you know what I mean. But I think it was the fact that they realised we've completely lost the public. The public, it's not the police, it's not the authorities, it's the public who are pulling us off the trains and don't want to know from us. And it's that I think...
I think you grant them a level of self-awareness that I think that the animals that they are not capable of.
I don't know. I mean, I really think that if they realise that there is serious resistance... I mean, for example, if the police... I mean, I'm not talking of them really being seriously assaulted, but these idiots who are closing down the M25 and gluing themselves to the road surface. If somebody arrived and, their car couldn't get through yet again, but they'd prepared, and they would just get out of their car with a box of kitty litter, used kitty litter, and just empty it on one or two of them. And if this would just be the general attitude of the public... I mean, you remember a week or two ago there was a guy with bagpipes.
Yes.
That just basically started playing the bagpipes into the face of one of them. And again, that sort of resistance to them, I think, is perfectly acceptable. But as you saw, he was immediately set upon by the police, and you just thought, if the police would just be as rigorous with them as it is in protecting them, then we wouldn't have a problem. But I think they should be open to utter abuse. People should be allowed to throw tomatoes at them. Don't beat them up, but just show your disdain to the full. Empty... if they're there on the road gluing themselves to something that's next to a pub and there's somebody sitting there and he's about to leave, but he just decides to empty the rest of his beer over the heads of one of them or whatever. If the population at large reacts like that...
But you know full well that if someone does that, it'll go down for assault.
Yes. Right? Yes, but as I say, that's where I think... again, I'm of a considerably older vintage than you, and I still think it should be perfectly permissible, within reason, for a police officer to smack a youth around the ears if they've done something absolutely daft. And we don't need to go down the road of, this person needs to be processed, 45 forms need to be filled in, and then there needs to be an application for whatever the heir to the ASBO is. But instead, if the police officer just basically wallops this 12-year-old kid that's causing a nuisance during the Remembrance ceremony, I think that would be enough. But, yes, we all know that that's no longer allowed.
Well, at the Remembrance thing, with the Remembrance example, it's more important to... it's more important to observe your own remembrance out of respect than it is to correct someone who's failing to do so. As soon as it's over, as soon as that 2-minute period is over, go for him like the clappers. But if you think it's worth it at all, but I don't appreciate when, and it's a little bit different if they come out of the chicken shop or wherever they've been, and start throwing things at the crowd. But I still think it's important to be a cut above. However, when it comes to people gluing themselves to the road or whatever, as soon as people get out of their cars and start kicking people, you'll see how quickly they tear themselves off things, I think.
Yes, but I don't necessarily think kicking people is the solution. Because,
well, they'd never do it again, because they won't have any fucking fingers.
Yeah, as I say, they are the ones who get done, and not only are they the ones that get done, the pictures then get shown in a different way, as in, here are the monsters assaulting. Whereas,
kill the media, kill them all.
If it is absolute, if it is just absolute disdain, if they are not hurt, but people basically just expressing, look, this is what we think of you, and they go home like sort of, half-drowned cats, covered in unspeakableness.
The response is different. They should just put their foot down, to be honest, and run them over. Like, that, it's as simple as that. Like, you've made yourself a speed bump, and I'm going to use you as one. Like, that's the way it is. I appreciate I'm being very...
Could we at least agree on the fact that the police are doing this thing, and they bring acetone, don't they? And these demonstrators expect the police to bring acetone these days, because with that they can dilute the superglue, and they then expect to be carefully prized off the road surface, and then led away and arrested. And I always feel that what the police ought to do is, yes, they should get them off the street, because they need to get the traffic rolling. But the attitude should be, well, you wanted to be glued to the street. You wanted to be glued somewhere. So we will glue you here outside the police station. We'll have one person, rather than guarding you so you are not assaulted while you're out there on the M25, we'll have one person there guarding the dozen of you to make sure that none of your friends can now come and unglue you with acetone. And if you want to spend the night there, by all means. Otherwise, I guess you'll just have to gnaw off your own arms. That sort of thing I would be perfectly open to.
That would be too logical, you see, British. I should also point out that my calls for violence are almost entirely hyperbolic frustration, and not an actual call for violence. And an expression of anger and frustration at the situation. At people being idiots, and I appreciate that every society throughout all of human history has had idiots, will have idiots, and will continue to have idiots.
Yes, but I think the nature of this idiocy is something new that we're seeing.
Well,
it's as I say, previously the disruption a demonstration caused, and this is what I find somewhat frustrating with this whole thing, where they're sort of saying, oh well, if you do away with us here, or if you change the laws so that we can be arrested, that's doing away with our right to peaceful protest. And you feel, well, the idea of peaceful protest is you carry a placard and you shout slogans, and there may be 100,000 of you walking towards Hyde Park in London, and this does cause disruption. Traffic can't get through because you're demonstrating. That's how we've always understood the right to peaceful protest, and how disruption in that regard is permissible. But notice how in that demonstration, in the traditional way of understanding demonstrations, the demonstration is the main thing. The voicing of dissent is the main thing. The disruption it causes is incidental to the actual demonstration. Whereas now what we are seeing is ever and ever smaller groups basically prioritizing disruption above all. So much more important than their actual message, much more important than their carrying placards and whatever, is to cause as much disruption as possible. And that is not within the rules of the game, as I understand it. So if there are many of you, and just through the sheer amount of you, you cause disruption, that's perfectly fine, because yes, you are entitled to demonstrate and voice your dissent. But when there's half a dozen of you and you're managing to close down a motorway, that's not the idea. And in that regard, I think there should perhaps be some legal clarification as to, what the rules of the game are, because I don't think this was ever within the spirit of it. Fair enough? Not so obvious? Have I completely lost you?
No.
Are we...
No, I just didn't think that I would get angry about this particular topic this evening. Oh dear, 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 dear. So I'll bring us on to something far less inflammatory. The Carl Rittenhouse trial.
Oh, you mean the trial everybody agrees on? Yes, okay, go on.
This is the reason I was late this evening. Thank you so much to Scowen, by the way, for telling us we were 78 seconds late this evening. Shocking, I know. Entirely my fault, but we're never actually late. We arrived precisely when I meant to. There is a Twitter account called Leftism on Twitter. Curious one. And it says, he defended himself. It's got some clips of Kyle being attacked by people with firearms, with a skateboard, and all that stuff. In fact, I will change the news viewer to show this particular image. I think that's going to be appropriate. And I'll even expand it to the whole screen. There we go, so people can see. And yes, just try and get it so it's a little bit more visible. There we go. Okay. So they're responding to someone saying Carl Rittenhouse had his mummy drive him across state lines with a military weapon to hunt humans. He was defending nothing and no one. His victims were and are exactly that, victims, not arsonists or looters, victims of a racist, anti-Semitic, inhuman mass murderer. The lunacy of someone who can come to this particular perspective drives me mad. I don't know if we've discussed Rittenhouse at all since it.
No, we haven't. No, we've never brought this up so far.
Since the event happened, certainly. I think we may have mentioned it at the time. Maybe at the time it happened, we did something, but it was a year ago. I think, was it a year ago? Yeah, it must have been, because it was during the summer of mostly peaceful protests. And yeah,
or the summer of love, as it shall be known in years to come.
Yeah, so we have a very, very, very clear. I don't know if you've been following the trial itself at all.
Yesterday I think I retweeted something which was it's by some black lawyer, I believe, but it's difficult to believe that a black guy with dreadlocks is a lawyer, but you know, at least that's what he purports to be. And he kind of took something like 50 minutes of statements by the in court or whatever, and distilled it down into a quick summary of 10 minutes, as in this is what happened in court.
Right.
And yes, it was quite sort of an eye-opener, and he was sort of saying, well, please do remember that these are the prosecution witnesses. And it's basically the prosecution witnesses are contradicting the prosecution.
Yes, quite considerable.
And that he thinks there is a very good chance that the defense attorneys at the end of the prosecution case will simply just ask for the case to be dismissed, because even the prosecution case seems to be stating that, you know, this isn't what happened here. In fact, was not what the prosecution is claiming it to be, and that their own witnesses seem to be confirming this.
Well, it's funny, isn't it? Because full disclosure, I'm fully pro Kyle. I think the man should not be in court and should be given a medal for what he dealt with that day, if I'm honest. But the general gist of it was, in terms of the trial, putting aside everything I know about the case, the defence had a poorer showing in opening statements than the prosecution. The defence tried too hard to oversell the whole case, but as obviously as witnesses were called by the prosecution, it seems to have gone completely tits up for them. Although, of course, the cope is already coming in now from what I'm going to ostensibly refer to as the left. I do see this as left-right issue, if I'm honest. I don't think there's anyone who is on the right who's disagreeing with the self-defense verdict. But
I would hazard a guess this is the hard left. I think even the sort of centre left or whatever are looking at this going, okay, come on, you've got to be taking the mickey, I cannot see, other than the sort of, the people who like to fancy themselves as, Antifa and whatever, they are the ones who hate this chap's guts. Just simply due to the fact that they would have been the ones rioting that night. Whereas I just cannot see that, whether you agree with people on the left or not, I really think the overwhelming majority of people, right and left, will be thinking, look, no. There is no way that this is murder or anything of the sort.
Well, the apart from the people who are obviously I appreciate Twitter isn't real life, okay, but it is interesting to me to at least try and see some of these responses, which were, I'm not going to lie, I was getting pretty upset. Not upset. Upset is the wrong word. I was getting pretty angry in general at some of these responses. Strong though they were. I'm just trying to, as I say, make this.
Well, I remember on Twitter, I think it was Adam Friended who retweeted something, in which somebody had basically said, "Oh well, here is Rittenhouse calmly kneeling, taking aim. This is clearly, this is clearly premeditated."
Oh, right, I see, yeah.
And you looked at this picture that was actually being put up, and you just think, hang on a moment, that's after he's been on the floor and he's getting back up again.
Yeah.
But the still that has been cut from it is one in which it looks as if he's kneeling on one knee, ready to take aim with a rifle.
Well, of course.
And you just think, no, anybody who has actually seen footage of it knows this to be completely untrue.
Of course.
So there is a lot of deliberate sort of deceit going on.
So really, of course, the feds had a drone in the area, which has also been providing footage of an aerial footage of the event. And so the prosecution tried to claim that Kyle shot Rosenbaum in the back, right? That's the argument, yes. and that because he shot him in the back, the crowd, who were obviously upstanding, patriotic, law-abiding citizens, took it upon themselves to disarm Kyle.
To perform a citizen's arrest, yes.
Yeah, and disarm him with a skateboard to the head, and a gun to the face, and the
dutiful citizens who sought to perform a citizen's arrest, who bore a fleeting similarity to a mob, but had nothing whatsoever to do with it.
Had nothing. Right, all those people screaming, "Get him! Get him!" who didn't know anything about the events of the evening, of course, would do so. The people who shot in, there are people in this thread who are defending the guy who shot not at Kyle but shot in the air as Kyle was fleeing. As therefore that was completely justified. As if this wouldn't scare the guy shitless, as well as anything else. You think somebody's shooting at me. I'm being chased by a guy who earlier threatened to kill me, and after this whole thing, the guy I've just shot, who I'm now, panicking about. For anyone who hasn't actually killed anyone, which I would hope to be everyone in the chat comments, it's not a very pleasant thing to do. Even with a gun, which is much less personal than other weapons, it makes you feel sick, very, very ill. You don't know what to do. And it can haunt you. It can cause PTSD. It's in fact the leading cause of PTSD is if you've killed someone because you didn't realise you were capable of that or anything else. But it's this kind of surreal thing where, you know, this is a 17-year-old kid. He's come down. He's offered medical assistance to people in the area. This nut job who's got out of a mental hospital has threatened to kill him and said to him, you know, if I find you late tonight, you're dead. The guy has said this to him because he prevented them from pushing a burning dumpster into a fuel station. And then, of course, things have escalated. Rosenbaum, who's the first guy who died, threw a bag with something in it. I think it was his clothes from the institution he was at Kyle, and lunged at him. He was shot by Kyle, and he was shot. I can't remember if he was shot twice,
4 times,
or 4 times. Yeah.
He sort of loosed off 4 shots, and one of those shots hit him in the back. So he must have kind of spun or something. One
of those shots exited his groin and entered his shoulder, which is marginally on his back, right? But this partially this lunge. If he'd been shot in the back, it would have come out the front of him, obviously. Although people don't seem to realise that actually bullets don't usually go clean through a person. They bounce around and come out in weird places. It's very it's not uncommon to get shot in sort of the gut and for it to come out shoulder, for instance. But the reality is that he was aggressed. He had done his civil duty to protect property. He was then attacked and by a madman who he then shot, and then the mob came after him. 2 other madmen, one of which who also had an illegal firearm. One of them who had the skateboard and attacked him with a skateboard. He killed the guy with the skateboard and then shot the bicep out of I can't remember how to pronounce his name. It's almost German. The other guy who also gave testimony, and basically gave testimony today to the effect of, you know, he didn't aggress me until I pulled the gun on him. Basically, it was fantastic. But you've got people here like, oh, you know, Rittenhouse was trespassing. He'd just pointed his gun at people unprovoked. When
you say that the guy who had his bicep shot out sounded German, whereas the other guy was only Rittenhauser.
Yeah. But this is mad. Like the Rittenhouse was trespassing and just pointed his gun at people unprovoked. If you listen to the prosecution in isolation, without then looking at the footage, without then listening to the defence's case, without then evaluating both positions against that footage, you must be blind. You must be blind. And this guy,
I think it is one of those cases where you just wonder, why has this come to court? You know, is it that one just felt that one needed to placate the mob and bring it to court so that one could say one had made an effort? Because, as you say, you look at it and there is just no way that there is no way one can craft an argument to say that anything approximating murder was involved here. I mean, according to this lawyer chap who did the 10-minute summary, you know, essentially he can only really be got for 2 misdemeanors. One is carrying, is it a gun over a state border, or I don't know.
Well, they keep arguing that, but he travelled from one town to another, and it was 15 minutes away.
And the other is that, strictly speaking, there was a curfew. Now, I think when it comes to the curfew, he would be entitled to basically say, look, I was there because clearly the curfew was being broken and there was a mob ready to destroy stuff. And given that he was on the right side of the law in that regard, chances are one can't really get him for that. If he was somehow illegally holding a gun or something like that, then that one might get him for, but it's nothing compared to what one is actually trying to allege. It's just farcical.
If they want to get him on a minor misdemeanor for carrying a firearm when he shouldn't have, but like everything else is that he'd be dead if he didn't have that gun. Yes. He'd be dead, exactly. But then you get comments like this: he had no business there. He crossed state lines. The fact that he armed himself proves he had intent of harming someone. Did he know he would use it at the riots? Probably not, but the fact that he was armed proves intentions. He was a medic who brought a weapon to defend himself, rightfully, against people who also carried weapons. You fucking idiot.
So yeah, basically, yes, there was intent, but the intent was there to use it if necessary. You know, the idea that the intent means this person travelled somewhere with an intention to murder is ridiculous.
The kid should have stayed home, Britisher. He went looking for trouble. Fact.
Yes, unlike all the other people out there who were attacking him.
If people want to burn down, like I grew up in a town called. In fact, I won't say the town I grew up in. I grew up in a town near Eastbourne, God's Waiting Room. If I had found out that someone was going to burn down Eastbourne, you know, especially when I worked in the town. Then I'm going to go there. I'm going to go there and try and prevent that happening, or see if I can help, or whatever. You know, like, clearly I'm asking for trouble if I go and try and protect it.
I think what we are seeing is in a way precisely the disease of our age. The fact that the people are reacting in this way doesn't really surprise me, because this is what we're seeing. And I know, I'm the terrible centrist, but I will say it. We're seeing it on both sides. This creation of this is our reality, and we see what we want to see, and that, you know, that doesn't surprise me. But what does surprise me is the fact that this should have spilled over into a courtroom, because there is no way you can find this chap guilty.
No. I mean, the whole reason it is so controversial is because there is so much video evidence, right? And like it was so public. Like there's cameras from multiple angles. Even the authorities have a camera on the scene. You know, it comes in the particular time of discontent where everybody is getting more and more polarized over mostly peaceful protests. Anyway, I just don't understand. Like, these people should not procreate. People like, maybe the first killing was self-defense, but he walked away from that first victim. Again, using the word victim, not believing what he'd just done. He'd not stick around to plead to self-defense. Instead, going to look for more trouble. Guilty. Mad. Absolutely mad.
I mean, at first, one basically just knew of the footage of skateboard man clobbering him, and then other people trying to set upon him and him shooting these folks. And that was basically explained away with, they were trying to, hunt him down because he had shot someone innocent before that. And ludicrous as that looked, and how do we say, as much as it defied credibility, because these people didn't look like folks who were seeking to perform a citizen's arrest.
No.
This was an angry mob. But, however much it didn't look like what they were claiming it to be, it at least was still possible, even though not probable. But the moment you then get to see the footage of Rosenbaum throwing the bag at him, somebody within very close distance loosing a gun, and then the next thing you know, Rosenbaum is lurching. It's basically surging towards him. Yes, this clear self-defense. The idea that you would claim it to be anything else is ridiculous.
But Britisher,
you have got an obvious case of self-defense, and then afterwards the supposed attack that was merely peacefully seeking to arrest the wrongdoer, in consequence of that, is just even more ludicrous.
But Britisher,
that something like that could happen on the night, fine, but in the cold light of day afterwards, to then think that a prosecutor would look at this and think, yes, this should go to court, that's what just baffles me more than anything else.
Britisher, it's the state against Rittenhouse, though. Like, the prosecutor, it doesn't matter if they care. They're getting a massive payday out of this, right? Or even though they do look ridiculous, and they seem to be tanking their credibility somewhat. But then you don't need a particularly good prosecutor. The prosecutor's quite happy to take his payday. And you have this person on Twitter say, I'm a gun owner. You don't use an AR-15 for self-defense. An AR-15 is used for one purpose: to kill. That's the purpose of every gun. Like, every gun is potentially lethal, right? Like, he did target shooting with it. He hunted. He shot cans. He did what kids do with air rifles, but, you know, it's America, so they used real rifles. Like, but he wasn't a danger to anyone. And then he goes and brings this thing. It's the only thing he has. Like, would you prefer that he brought, like, a fireman's axe or something like that? Perhaps if he clubbed his attackers to death with a brick, you would have been fine with it. It just drives me mad. Like, fuck's sake.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, I think we can tell that the frustration level of Not So Obvious today seems to be slightly heightened.
I mean, inflated. Yes. Not that I've...
But yes, no, I am... Yes, no, yeah, that's me again. No, I am always kind of sort of perplexed by seeing prosecutions of certain things happen, you know. I mean, over here we had, you know, that famous one with the Icelandic volcano that erupted, and it was Nottingham Airport. I think tweeted something about the possibility of closure or something like that, and then some chap who had a flight booked said something along the lines of, you know, you better be open when my flight's ready to go, or else I'll blow the place up. And it was an obvious joke, and he got prosecuted for it. And you just think, I'm sorry, but, you know, how does this go through the process? How does the police look at this and go, yes, this is definitely something we need to hand over to the prosecution service? How does the prosecution service possibly look at this and go, yes, this definitely needs to be, you know, tried in court? And to that point, how do you get to the point where a judge is willing to sit through this without, after a quarter of an hour, just go, get out of my court? I just find these things baffling, and they happen again and again and again in different contexts about completely different things. But yes, you are just taken aback by it, because when you look at this whole Rittenhouse thing, you just go, no, I'm sorry, why is it in court? It stands no chance of success. Nobody in their right mind would conclude that this person is guilty of murder.
Well, you can, as I said earlier, you can see the cope is starting to come in now. So the poor jury who are trying to, they're arguing. People are already they're trying to expose their identities. Secondly, they said, oh, you know, it's all white women. So therefore, this is, you know, stacked against them, right? Even though there is no racial component in any way to this crime. You know, in fact, Rittenhouse himself is half Hispanic, and the 3 people he murdered were white. Like, there's no, like, racial motivation that he went out to hunt black people or something like that, which is what seems to be alleged. And then, secondly, you've got the...
The racial element could be that it was the summer of peace regarding George Floyd.
Yeah.
So these white aggressors were there in order to spread peace and tranquility on behalf of Black Lives Matter.
Oh yeah, of course, with fire.
So that would, I guess, be the racial element.
Anyway, so they've got that going on, and then you've also got this this argument that they can't make a sound decision because they're white, and therefore would be biased. And then the assumption, baseless as it seems to be to me, they're all Trumpers as well. Because, you know, if you're going to go all out in terms of, like, creating an effigy of an enemy, you may as well go all out. And so this idea, you know, it's a farce, it's a joke. I feel bad. Like, the guy is going to have to live essentially in protection for the rest of his life because mad people who should either be in prison or dead are going to come after him and try and kill him. I don't know.
Yes, I could well imagine he might be taken into some FBI protection program or something because, yes, I can't see how that chap can live an ordinary life.
So, no. And I feel terrible for him. He was only a kid, you know.
But I like what you're referring to, you know, regarding the jury, that one is effectively getting one's excuse in why one is losing first. I mean, you know, I have alluded, you know, not too long ago to those very kind of things. Basically, I'm a winner, I always win. and therefore, if I'm losing, it's because the other side cheated, because otherwise I win. So I still win. And therefore, the same thing with the Rittenhouse thing. We always win if the other side, we are on the side of justice. If the other side wins, it is merely because they've cheated. So basically, a jury stacked with white Republican women who more than likely harbor Nazi sympathies. So in reality, in actual fact of natural justice, we still win. It's just that the other side won because they cheated. This is the strange psychology which seems to inhabit the present day, I'm afraid.
I don't know how we're going to get over it, Britisher. Like, in a world of people shouting, why be this when you could be kind? And yet everyone is being awful.
I think one of the things we have to understand is that you can build up towards the early 1980s, in which things were very heightened and very polarized. But you can then also come out of the early 1980s and things can get back to a more normal way again.
But the 80s were primarily about, if I'm honest, British, like even everything 80s and pre in this country was predominantly about class. Now, class has a lot more tangibility to it, I would say, than the ethnic or the racial component. And it certainly has a lot more to it in terms of sort of cultural identity than even left and right, because one of the things that we're noticing, like the right likes to say that the left eats itself, and the left likes to say that the right is completely fragmented and has no identity, which it is. Like when people, there is no such thing as the right. Well, of course there's such a thing as the right, but there is, what the right is completely, there's no commonality really between people on the right, and in the same way the left is just like the more mad they get, but they all think that there's this weird kind of individualism on the left at the moment, where they're like, we're all collectivist and we must all defend one another, but we're all individual and we're all special snowflakes, and this weird
hyper-individualism.
Yeah, it's weird hyper-individualism.
I'm so individual because I have got tattoos, nose rings, and neon-coloured hair, just like all the other people standing next to me.
But it ends up being such a walking contradiction. There's no wonder that they eat themselves, because they're constantly trying to outdo each other for how special they are, or how oppressed they are, or whatever it happens to be. And similarly, I think it's not how special in the case of most of them. I think, yes, we know full well that in some cases it is how special. I mean, the more transgender you get, the more special you get. But I think when it comes to the ideology of the left, it's how pure. And yeah, but
I think
what
we
is
have also
pure?
seen that the right is also capable of that in recent times.
But
it is this purity.
But what is pure is constantly changing as well. And you used to have, like the reason as well, I think that the right tends to win the cultural battles is because the left is constantly exploring new space, as you say. But the right is much more, or used to be, much more stable. And it used to have a foundation which was built upon two pillars, really, three pillars, I suppose. One, religion. Like, the vast majority of people in this country were Christian, and Christians were catered to, and no one else was really... Like, you could be a Buddhist, or you could be a Muslim, or whatever, and no one really cared, or a Sikh. No one really cared, as long as you benefited us. And otherwise, like, your religion didn't really come into it. Everything was geared around the majority, which was the Christian population. You then have the monarchy, who used to direct things, had a much more influential role in both public and private life. You had... And then you had the kind of class thing, which, broadly speaking, there are three stratas of class. If you were on any particular boundary, then you didn't worry. And now we just have like this kind of, there is no working class anymore, really. We have like a very minority working class. We have an immigrant population who fulfills the role of the working class, and then we have the middle class, which is swollen to such grossly disproportionate proportions. And when I'm talking about class here, I'm not even talking about income. I'm just talking about the way in which people behave. You know, there's a joke, isn't there, in Red Dwarf, where Lister says, don't tell anyone. But one time I went into a wine bar. That's his grand sort of confession, is that he went into a wine bar, and it's a silly, and it's played off as a joke or whatever, But the concept of being a class traitor was something real, and it seems silly to anyone who's on the outside of it. But especially if you're young, that's the sort of thing which makes sense to you. It's important, to define the lines the boundaries that you have. You've rejected your parents' norms, and you're going to find your own. And one of the things that people found solace in is, these different little countercultural movements and their class equivalents. So, but these pillars were a lot more stable, I should say, than anything that the right has to lean on now. Nobody cares about the Christians. They're the most persecuted people on earth, but nobody cares. And I'm not saying that to be hyperbolic. By every conceivable metric, Christians are the most persecuted people on earth. As we've seen in France, for instance, a church burns down every 2 weeks, and 2/3 of these are due to arson, and or a church, I think, is desecrated rather than burned down, and it includes burning down. All across the world, under every metric, they're the people who are killed the most for their religion and anything else. But nobody wants to talk about it. This country has completely given up on their Christianity, and I don't even care how you feel about that. But because being an atheist or whatever you are, and myself, who goes back and forth on my faith, some days I'm basically agnostic and some days I'm a Christian through and through, but everyone struggles with their faith if they've known anything about spiritualism.
If they want to run over demonstrators.
But they're very kind and forgiving of me, But I look at it and I go, this was something which was just kind of taken as a given, and it's no longer there anymore. You could agitate on different grounds, but there was some things, the arguments were, look at the things which bring us together. We have these things that bring us together as people, and now we have so little that brings us together, be it on a class basis, be it on a cultural basis, be it on a national basis, be it on a religious basis. We have so little that we have gone back to fucking race. People have gone back to race because they don't know what categories to bloody go by. It's either categories.
I don't think though that people are going to race in order to sort of unite.
No, it's not about uniting.
If anything,
but it's about trying to define the borders of the world and define why they disagree with people on so many different things. And they've gone through it. Either they've gone and taken a massive minutia lens, which is we're at the level of such individualism that everyone is so different that they may as well be a nation. The concept that no man is an island is alien.
They're all
to these
citizens
people.
of the world.
Because exactly, because they're so distinct that they couldn't possibly have anything in common with anyone else. And yet at the same time, because they are so unique, therefore they must accept everyone. Again, a walking contradiction in and of itself. And then you've got the other people who say, well, I need to look for the people who are the same as me now. And they go, well, right, okay, well, they don't believe the same as me. They don't think the same as me. They don't have the same history. They don't have the same heritage. And they get caught up in this idea. And they go, the only thing I can go for is race, because that's the thing that's under attack at the moment by those people on the left.
In my view, the one thing, and this is completely impractical. I'm not postulating this as a practical solution. If anything, I'm thinking aloud here.
Yeah.
The one thing that people ought to do in order to cure them from this disease would be to live abroad for a while. I don't mean go on holiday. Because we know that a lot of these people who, are citizens of the world and wish to undo Brexit and rejoin the EU and all this, they love to go on holiday to the south of France for a week or two. That's not the same thing. Go live somewhere else. Go live somewhere else, go work somewhere else, and then very, very quickly, rather than it being just some sort of picture postcard experience of isn't it all lovely, and don't they have nice white wine?
You realise what's different about them and what's important to you.
Precisely. You then begin to get that sort of feel of, hang on a moment, things really work differently here. I quite like that. Oh, the food is really good, but I definitely don't like that. And yesterday my neighbour said something to me about, that I just felt was absolutely appalling. Once they get to witness that, and then they come back, and that's why I think that the people more than anyone else one should do this to is the Scots. And then let them come back and then say, we're totally different from the English.
But people don't seem to realise as well that is also the experience of people who come here, except that they've been able to build their own little enclaves, right? But the reason they don't want to venture out from them, the reason they don't want to engage with the other parts of British society, are because to them British society is appalling. Like, it's alien, it's scary, it's weird.
There is definitely some of that.
It's not normal to them.
I think that's where both culturally and sort of as government, one should kind of start putting one's foot down. You can, I'm not saying people can't live here who don't want to be sort of us, if you know what I mean, because in that very same way, people live as expats, from us in other parts of the world, in Arabia and whatever.
Yeah,
but it's precisely that. It's that understanding. You are an expat. You are there. You will eventually go home. You're not really setting up permanent residence in Dubai or anything like that. If you want to be here, then maybe it's time that you actually embraced it. Or else, you perhaps ought to start thinking about just getting lost.
Vix in chat says that I'm saying this is mostly online behaviours. IRL interactions are by and large the same as before, if not more kinder. Yes, the media tells us it's shite and shows us that, but it's not all bad. I'm sorry, Vix. As much as I respect you as a long-time viewer of the channel, people live online with forming these horrific parasocial relationships more than ever before. In reality, of course, people interacting with one another are typically, cordial to one another, but there are spiking crime rates in all sorts of different places, especially on the fringes of different communities. And I'm not just talking about, different ethnic groups here. I'm talking about communities of all types. And and I know it's not all bad, but it is getting worse. And you just cannot take away from the fact that there are fewer and fewer and fewer in-person. I remember there were these articles, when I was a child, sort of, 10 years old, and I'm looking and I'm going, they're saying, so-and-so spends 12 hours per week online, and his parents are concerned that he's spending too much time. Like, the average person these days spends 12 hours per day hooked into some form of online media. Like, it doesn't matter what kind of media that it is. They spend that much time on that. Like, the idea that you wouldn't spend almost all of... I mean, look at what we're doing now. We're having a conversation over the internet. People are tuning in. That's just 2 hours or an hour and a half as it is now.
Well, I mean, I of course, I remember the day when my children are watching too much television.
Yep.
I just go, well, yeah, I mean, again, now we're still looking at screens.
But now we have Netflix and people binge watch entire seasons.
It's not broadcast. It's not broadcast television. It's just the internet or whatever. But as such, yes, these fears that were voiced then, and they were not just voiced, they were taken seriously.
Yeah.
Those things now just look completely laughable to us. And they look laughable because we've gone so much further. But at the same time, we also have to take some things with a pinch of salt that we get upset about today, because in the future we'll just look back at it and go, yeah, wasn't that ridiculous?
The thing that I find mad about the whole thing, be it internet or television or whatever, is life is so much richer than the fucking TV, right? Like, I went out, I made a concerted effort in, not last year, but the year before, to go out and try and do something. I took salsa classes, of all things. I went to the gym, I took salsa classes, I went out and did visiting at different places. I tried to avoid using devices wherever possible. I didn't snap pictures of my food, I didn't snap pictures of places I went. I built memories, and I went with people that I trusted and could enjoy those times with. And it's so much better than anything that has happened online. If I'm honest, I will shill the basket weavers till the day I die. Those events that we've had, pub meets, and people went to Kew Gardens yesterday. Kew Gardens. I haven't been to a National Trust, Kew Gardens thing in years. It was great. People loved it. I was gutted I couldn't go. These sorts of events are the things which build memories and bring people together, and it drives me mad that we have lost ourselves to this weird parasocial abstraction that does nothing for the human spirit or soul or psyche.
I think we need to be careful that we don't kind of just decide that whatever trends we observe,
it should be a tool.
They are just basically there permanently. So I think I mentioned it yesterday on the week that was, that I feel that society is kind of, learning how to deal with some of these things. Because the reason I mentioned it was because, the government now wants to make dogpiling illegal and stuff like that. And you look at it and you just sort of think, no, it's that we've got technologies that are, new, and society has just not found a way to deal with these things yet. That doesn't mean it won't happen. At some point, we will mature to the point where we can deal with this. And this isn't wishful thinking. I mean, just look at sort of the evolution of technology with mankind. We've always eventually adapted to these things and then just moved on. I mean, one of the reasons why the rest of the world out there is such complete mayhem is because they didn't have any time to evolve with some of the technologies that we developed, and then they suddenly became available to them. And yes, I mean, that's why Africa, I don't know how many AK-47s there must be swimming around Africa and they're all shooting each other with it. Yes, because one never had that prolonged period of evolution, societal evolution, of getting used to these technologies that came along and adapting step by step as one invented new technologies. So if you just drop an AK-47 in ancient Rome, can you imagine what on earth would happen? And in that regard, I think the internet, it's a fabulous piece of technology and whatever, and no doubt it will, be a positive, but we're getting used to this thing. We're learning. We're a child learning how to deal with a new toy. And yes, at the moment we're completely obsessed with it or whatever, but at some point, things will move on. Just imagine what people in the early internet were completely obsessed with, news groups or whatever. I mean, I wonder how many people still frequent news groups today. So I really think these things just move on. They have their highs, they peak, and then it just, you just get on with life. And that's why I'm dead against, trying to introduce laws against dogpiling and whatever, because yes, it's a social wrong. You're breaking a social rule. It's just that social rules haven't really percolated through in these areas. Whereas it sure as hell isn't a criminal offence. That's, as far as I'm concerned, that's ridiculous. But But yes, it's the world we inhabit, but it's the world we inhabit while we're learning how to get along with this stuff. And yes, at the moment it looks as though we're kind of, a kid on cocaine with social media. But I say, give it time, and things will become more mature. Is perhaps the wrong word, the wrong term. But things will calm down, and the masses will begin to frown more and more on the sort of excesses that at the moment seem to be dominating things.
I wish I shared your optimism, British. I really do.
You have to understand that, as such, human history is one of us always being in a state of crisis. Something is always wrong. Something always threatens to upset everything, and there are always people who feel this is the end. This new thing that's coming, VHS video, this is the end, it will destroy everything, this is the end of civilization as we know it. Well, no, it wasn't, and we all got on with life. And in that regard, yes, things change, but every time things substantially change, we flail around and make a mess of things, and yes, the worst of us go completely berserk and start dogpiling people online and trolling them and telling women MPs that they want to rape them or what. We've had all this nonsense, but we will grow out of this, and I'm absolutely certain we will. Because so far we haven't succeeded in annihilating ourselves. We didn't manage it having hundreds of nuclear warheads pointed at each other during the Cold War. I don't think that we'll manage to destroy ourselves with the internet.
I have to choose to believe you, Britisher, because if I don't, I'm going to go utterly and inconsequentially mad. Not inconsequentially, probably consequentially mad.
Incontrovertibly?
Incontrovertibly. Any kind of English term which makes sense. I can't take any more. I think
we have got to the point where at times the stupidity is getting so aching that you just basically want the world to stop so you can get off. It really has got. I think it has got to do with the fact that we have got certain diseases that simply have taken over. One is the disease of raising awareness, and by now, whenever I hear, what I want to do is raise awareness for, my eyes glaze over. I don't want to hear it anymore.
Whenever I hear someone say that, I want to do fuck all, because actually doing something beyond raising awareness is actually difficult.
Yes, please, no more raising awareness. And then, yes, we've got these sort of NGOs that are completely out of control. And you just sort of feel, look, I'm sorry, but at some point you just have to shut up and go away. And I think the only thing that can ever achieve that is social pressure. I don't think
I think a lot of them are beyond social pressure, because we're at the stage where we are an international, or a broadly global sort of economy. And the powers that be, shall we say, are people who are quite happy to do you would have had to get your funding from somewhere at least nationally based, and if it was internationally based, it was going to be very, very few. It would have come from within another power that you could then negotiate with to either influence, shut down, or if you wanted to promote this other group. But now you have groups in Greece, for instance, the people who are helping migrants lie to get in on asylum sort of status, and they're powered by groups which have no national backing, basically not shadowy organisations really, because they don't need to be. They can operate completely out in the open. Because
you kind of wonder who is actually funding the subversion, because it is subversive. There is no doubt about it. I mean, we only need to look what's happened with Belarus, and they seem to be releasing these migrants as a literal weapon on the Polish border.
Yeah.
I mean, we also have seen what's he called, Erdogan in Turkey, who also knows that he can turn the migrant tap on and off whenever he pleases.
Yep.
We've also got, I saw a video of some sorts once, trying to remember what they were called. There was some group in Libya, and it's a group of mercenaries. And for the life of me, I can't remember what they were called anymore. But they were largely East European and mainly Russian, and it seemed to be a Russian-backed operation. And you just sort of wonder, well, what are the Russians doing in Libya? And then these sort of investigative reporters and whatever said, look, there is sort of an undercurrent that Russia would quite like to have a piece of whatever settlement happens in Libya, because they would like to, just like Erdogan, just like Belarus, they would like to have their finger on the button of the migrants, and Libya being one of the main transits for sub-Saharan Africans trying to get into Europe via Italy. They realize the power of this. They have seen how the West is struggling internally to come to terms with this, and how it's effectively tearing itself apart over this issue. And that therefore, one of the ways in which to destabilize everything is to release migrants. So if you have some sort of say over a country that can do that, then you have real power. And yes, the fact that sort of, Russian interests would be present in Libya in the form of mercenaries in order to try and basically get some of that power, some of that influence on that situation. I mean, that tells you everything you really need to know about the present day sort of immigration crisis. It's a crisis sort of conscience, of the West not being able to square it, that you simply can't produce any useful majorities. If you decide one thing, the other side will tear you apart, and vice versa. It's one of those things that seems to split the political tribes right down the middle, and they will simply go to war with each other over this. And therefore, if you really want to sow dissent and disunity and whatever, this subject is ideal. So much so that they're even fighting over it. They're fighting over access to be able to do this. And yes, I think that it says just about everything we need to know about the situation, that there are outside powers who realize the subversive power of certain subjects on the West, and they are deliberately playing them. And yes, I think we can imagine that some of these groups that help facilitate immigrants coming into Europe, you can be absolutely certain that there will be some money coming from outside powers, China or whatever, who seek to destabilize things. I'm quite certain that will be the case. There are real-life rivals out there who will do everything to harm us, while a significant part of the population wishes to be a citizen of the world and sit round a campfire and sing Kumbaya. And you just go, well, no, it's not the way the world works.
It's mad. I remember having a conversation with people in my one of my previous houses that I lived in. And they said, wouldn't it be lovely if there were no borders, and and everyone should have a direct democracy vote on everything, basically. And I said, you're mad. They said, why are you mad? Like, they couldn't even see the natural fallacies of their thing. I said, as soon as you open it up, you've got the vast majority of the world, like the largest majority population, are either one, Chinese, or two, the major religions. And I'm afraid, like, that the mullah is not going to allow you to have a voice in this world order.
No,
and
you
neither is
completely
Xi Jinping.
misunderstand. You completely misunderstand. What we need to wait for is for the moment in which Switzerland sets out to conquer the world and enforces direct democracy on everybody.
I love this Mr. Goatflakes, who, if he is who I think he is good at... Sorry, not Goatflakes, sorry. Galactica Watkins says, we're going to need another stable for all those Trojan horses, Britisher. I like that. I like it. They're just a stable full of hundreds of Trojan horses, because that's what it feels like we're dealing with at the moment.
I think when it comes to the Trojan horses and whatever, I mean, sort of early on, Putin got a lot of stick for closing down a lot of NGOs, or basically saying if it's an NGO with any sort of foreign funding, that it has to basically be registered as some sort of foreign entity. And people were sort of, oh, well, this is, going against Amnesty International and this and that and the other. And you think, well, no, maybe it's not going after that. It may just be going after any sort of other NGO that seems interested in causing all sorts of mayhem within the country. So, I mean, when it comes to Extinction Rebellion, are we really sure that all their money is entirely from volunteers with plastic buckets?
Isn't. We know full well where it comes from.
So I really think some questions need to be asked, and whether these more authoritarian regimes that have basically clamped down on them, and no doubt will have also clamped down at the same time on, much more sensible organizations, and they've just used this as an excuse to basically also close down the Amnesty Internationals and whatever. But you do have to ask yourself whether we really need to sort of curb some of this nonsense that's going on with these organizations that seem to be completely out of control. I'm sorry.
It's mad.
I mean, take Stonewall here in this country.
Yeah.
Look at the absolutely ridiculous amount of influence this country is, this organization has had. Now it seems to be on the wane. It seems to be losing this. That I think the more daylight has been shone on that, the more some of the corporations, and also some of the government departments have recoiled from letting Stonewall have that much of a say. But didn't I just read that I think somewhere in the Ministry of Defence or whatever, there is some absolutely hardline Stonewall convert who is asking everybody who partakes in any sort of meeting. So these are the mandarins in Whitehall, to not only state their name and their role, but also their preferred pronoun. So this has kind of been handed down from some highly influential person in the Ministry of Defence that this must be done. And you just look at it and you say, what the hell?
Anyone who acts like a child should be treated like one and just thrown out the building, if I'm honest.
This is just it. I think not too long ago, this is within my own lifetime, I think they would have been. One would have just gone, no, I'm sorry, get back to us when you've grown up. We don't want to hear this. But now, due to various things that have happened, I think the fact that, for example, society has become more litigious, I mean, that's also something, the Americans have given us this. And I think this is happening all across the Western world, that this sort of US litigation culture has taken over. And therefore everybody is treated with kid gloves in that regard. But at the same time, yes, these NGOs that have sort of introduced sort of a culture of, yes, but you must, and we must be represented. And just look at what's happened at, Yorkshire County Cricket Club. I'm sorry, it just makes you want to spit. It's ridiculous. I mean, have you been following that story at all?
Sorry, which one?
Yorkshire County Cricket Club.
No,
They are presently engrossed in a racism scandal.
Why?
Because a previous player of theirs, who is Asian, claims to have been racially abused to the point where at times he wanted to commit suicide. And, I think the key is former player. So this is somebody who is no longer employed, so we've got rid of him because perhaps he's no longer good enough, or something like that. So
he didn't raise a grievance whilst he was there. Not even in private, not even with anyone else.
Let's get our own back. And Yorkshire County Cricket Club, and you have to understand, whether you're interested in cricket or not, cricket is quite a big sport, and Yorkshire is one of the big clubs in this. So when it comes to Yorkshire cricket, this is an important thing. And they held a sort of perfunctory investigation and said, okay, yeah, there seems to have been something racist said, but yeah, fine, let's just move on with it. No, how dare they? This is a whitewash. They're not wanting to. Nobody is being punished for this. And then the more and more that has actually come out on this story, you feel, hang on a moment, we're not being fed the entire story here. Again, one is highlighting the things one wants to highlight, things that make them appear in a bad light and whatever. So there was one cricketer, for example, who said, "Yes, I did call him a racist word. Cracky. Let's just be clear. That's the word. I mean, even the new chairman of the cricket club has since said the word in order to let people know what was actually said. But this was as part of banter between them, and he said, if he's honest, the Asian chap, he would admit that he used just as bad expressions for me. So basically this was a bit of sort of, sledging between the two of them. They were winding each other up, but it was never malicious. But of course, if you presented it in the right light, if you claim to be the victim and you just feel, I'm sorry, but on the face of it, from what we've heard, nothing actually has happened. This isn't a racist incident in the sense of this person was bullied and abused and whatever. Of course, when he brought this allegation, he immediately used a sort of the vocabulary of someone sort of, adept in it. So it wasn't just racism. No, this was institutional racism at Yorkshire County Cricket Club and things like that. So it was designed to wound right from the beginning. And you just feel, this is deeply unfair. So to me, it looks like nothing actually happened here, but now one has to start apologising. I mean, the chairman earlier today was on the BBC giving an interview, and he fell over himself apologising to the public, apologising to the player, and then when asked about certain things, oh, well, you'll have to give me a bit of time, I've only just come into the job, obviously I'll have to inquire into certain things and speak to some people. And you just go, so you've apologised for something that you haven't actually investigated how it happened or whether it happened in the first place. And this is where these sort of entities find themselves today. That's why in the corporate world, everybody is so terrified. Everybody always distance themselves from anything that gets attacked, and everybody's bending over backwards with their rainbow-coloured avatars during Pride Month and whatever, because everybody wants to show that they're a good little comrade, and they're playing the game as is being demanded of them, because they're terrified of something like this happening to them. Because, yes, it really doesn't look as if anything serious happened, but just because the allegation was there, this club, and it could be anything. It could be a football club. It doesn't matter that it's cricket. They were absolutely crucified in the national media.
Yeah.
All their sponsors have disappeared over the hill, and now they're having to desperately dig themselves out of something that they never caused in the first place.
I hate it, Brisha. I hate everything about it. Everything about the situation. Everything about the weird kind of societal pseudo-shame that has then led to people being so polarised that they don't want to touch even an allegation of such a thing.
Yeah, it's sort of these moral panics. And, you know, if you have any experience of moral panics, you will know that in the past when these things happened, the politicians also voted along with the moral panic, even though they didn't necessarily believe in it, because they knew that resistance was futile. So, back in the 80s when they banned the video nasties, how many MPs do you really think were sitting on the benches, on the green benches in Westminster saying, oh yes, these videos, they're the end of civilization, we need to ban all this stuff? And how many of them thought, look, if I don't vote against this, the Daily Mail will murder me tomorrow, so I'll just go along with it. And these sort of moral panics, they are incredibly dangerous. They can be immensely damaging. But it appears that, you know, for time immemorial, when they crop up, the powers that be just go along with force majeure and just go, look, we can't possibly resist this, so we might as well just play along. And therefore, if you are caught by one of these things, you know, don't expect any help from anybody, because there just won't be anything.
No.
You just get murdered.
Okay. Yeah. I think we've talked this. I think.
Sorry.
No.
Yes, on that bleak note, let's move on.
I think we'll call it there for the evening. But I appreciate. No. You're being very salient. I understand. But as chat's saying, if our politicians just work to please the public and not tomorrow morning's papers, but this is the thing, they've always worked to please tomorrow morning's papers because those are what speak to the public.
In order to highlight at least some positive in this, always remember that many of the things that were banned with the video nasties have since actually been shown on mainstream television. So, with the passage of time, these things tend to level out.
Yeah, but then, like, it goes one way, but does it go the other? That's the question. The things which were then shown then get restricted again because people realise that they had, like, a detrimental effect. And I'm not just saying this about video nasties, and I don't have a particularly strong opinion on them, but I'm saying, you know, what you effectively describe is people have, you know, as technology has passed on, as tastes and exposure to things has increased, you know, we have a higher tolerance for such things. But, you know, does it ever go the other way? I wonder. I unfortunately,
I don't think that something like that could be introduced today.
No.
So I think in that regard, as a society, we've kind of outgrown that. We had these moral panics. We haven't outgrown the fact of having moral panics. That's the worry. But once we've had a moral panic and a few years pass, one seems to look back on it and go, oh, yeah, that was a mistake. And I think that, I guess at heart, I'm always the optimist. And I think that, yes, a lot of the stuff that we're looking at today, that, let's face it, is utterly insane.
Yeah.
In 10, 20 years' time, we will be looking back at it, and I think society at large will have moved on from them. And it won't be... I don't think in 20 years' time we're still going to have... what is it? 2S LGBTQI plus people on TikTok telling us how we must respect people who are gender fey. I think we'll more than likely have moved on to a point where we will be looking back at that and rolling our eyes and going, oh yes, you remember that?
I live in hope for the day where the concept of the gender fluid kink shaming, whatever it happens to be, dragonfly, is as bizarre and confusing as looking at the mods and rockers of yesteryear. But we'll see.
Oh, I think it will be considerably worse than the mods and rockers of yesteryear. I think the public opinion that will be preeminent about these things will be this was utter madness. This was complete insanity.
I hope so. I really hope so.
I really. It's not because I wish it so. It really is because certain things just they can't prevail. Largely because yes, they're not at all grounded in truth or reason or anything. And you can play the game for so and so long, but then eventually it starts falling apart. And for anybody who watched the week that was, what's this, Crichton? It's a banana.
It's a banana.
What's this? It's an orange. What's this? It's an apple.
You should audition for What's My Fruit.
It's simply it is a banana, it is an orange, and it is an apple. And it isn't the Bolivian Navy out on manoeuvres.
No. It isn't
and
small,
you can claim it's the Bolivian Navy.
War.
You can persecute people who are not claiming it's the Bolivian Navy, but sooner or later the glaringly obvious fact that it isn't the Bolivian Navy will win out.
You're telling me you're not a small off-duty Czechoslovakian traffic warden?
Precisely, yes. And that's why eventually certain things will collapse. And it's not just in the trans thing, it's in a lot of spheres of this. They can only be maintained by ceaseless, endless militancy. And in the end, this structure can't be held up. I mean, always remember that the sort of 1970s feminists, the Dworkins and co, they collapsed. Now, we made the error of thinking they'd all gone away. What we didn't realise is that after their movement effectively collapsed into the dust and was gone, because they made a huge amount of noise in their day, but then eventually it just dissipated and it fell apart. And we just all thought, okay, great, we can get on with our lives. What we didn't realise is that they'd all taken to the universities. People made jokes, this includes me, made jokes about Professor Germaine Greer being introduced on Question Time. Oh, how ludicrous, Professor Germaine Greer. None of us clocked, hang on, what is she doing being a professor? Wasn't she just some feminist writer? Why is she a professor? Well, of course, she took to the University of Warwick and started teaching women's studies. And where do you think all these militants came from who then started teaching the next militants and so on? Well, yeah, so it will collapse, but when it collapses, we should just have the wisdom to learn from the past and realise to keep an eye on these lunatics.
There we go, ladies and gentlemen. We shall look forward to the coming collapse. Artful Lodger chimed in some time ago with a super chat saying, Poland, hold the door. Podor. I believe that's a reference to Game of Thrones, is it not? But we shall see. I mean, Poland is a country which I watch with much interest for several reasons, but we shall see how they cope with things.
They are holding the door. They are presently wanting to build a wall.
That'll be curious.
Because of those immigrants being released by Belarus.
Yes.
And the EU is both complaining about Belarus doing what it's doing, but at the same time is also complaining about Poland building a wall.
Yeah. Yeah. People going to complain. All right. I do have to get off now. So it's been great, obviously, as always, talking to you, Britisher. I feel like I've been going utterly mad this evening, so always good to have you dealing with that.
Just breathe, and believe an old man who tells you that times previously have also been crazy, and the craziness tends to go away.
I may have to rename this stream "NSO has a breakdown" or something like that. That'd be that one. We'll see how that goes. All right, ladies and gents, thank you ever so much. It's been great to have you here. Thank you to everyone in the chat. Thank you to Sitskern and Arthur Lodger for chiming in with a couple of quid to help keep us afloat. And we will see you next Monday, hopefully. I am moving this weekend, but I should be there. I should be able to go. All right, take care, everybody, and good night. Bye-bye.